here. Here for the winner. Here for the baseball. Yamamoto's going to open up tonight, and tonight the Dodgers will either be 100% winners or 0%. We'll see how it goes. So, anyways, for those of you who are slow, and there you go, Brian. For those of you who are slowly joining, we're going to get going in about 3 minutes. I have found after doing this a few times that people kind of hop on and off throughout, and then we actually get the bulk of our views after we package it up and then email it out. Apparently, everybody likes to watch on their own timing, except for Michael, Mike, and Brian. So, and John. Anyways, we're going to get going here in about 2 minutes. I am working on a column, Michael, to talk about the new rules surrounding the ability of pitchers, catchers, and batters to be able to challenge umpires in real time. So when I went to a preseason game last Sunday at Angel Stadium, I got to see that happen 3 times. And one time they did overturn the umpire's call. So a little bit of change to baseball. Actually, I kind of like it. It was pretty cool. So I also like the fact that you're not going back to some obscure group of people in the back room in New York City making the call. It actually is. It just happens right there in front of you. So hopefully, like with such things, the umpires just get better at doing their job, because I guess the analogy I would make would be to like a judge in a courtroom who, judges in courtrooms operate a lot more better, operate a lot more legally. What's the right word? Because they know that if they screw up in their courtroom, it's going to go to it could get appealed. So hopefully our pitchers are doing more. Our umpires are doing more due diligence, because they don't want to get embarrassed. Anyways, we're going to get going here in about 1 minute. Drew, welcome. Joel, welcome. Tom, welcome. We're going to get going here in about, like I said, about 1 minute, and then we'll just get right into it. I got a full agenda of stuff. That's not even including what you all may come up with in the chat. These glasses will go on and off, depending on what I'm doing. Actually, I'll just leave them off. All right. Well, you know what? We'll just kind of get going. It takes me a minute to kind of warm up anyway. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody for being with us. And it was fun this morning. For those people who don't know the Substack multiverse, they have all these different internal incentives and charts and programs and lists that you could be on. So I woke up this morning to once again find So Does It Matter, the Substack on the National Rising in Politics list again. That happens every once in a while. It's usually very correlated to when we get a spurt of new subscribers. They especially seem to queue off of paid subscribers. So if you're on here and you're not a paid subscriber, I would encourage you to participate. But you may not want to do it today. We're getting ready to do a sale, so I wouldn't recommend that you do it before the sale, but at the next sale, jump in. Anyways, welcome to So Does It Matter Live. This is our 3rd time doing this. I got a full slate of things that I want to talk about with those of you that have joined us, and we're going to start by talking about the California governor's race. That's going to feed right into a little conversation about the upcoming California Republican Party convention. We're going to talk a little bit about how jacked up things are at the Los Angeles Unified School District and with the Bay Area Rapid Transit District, and about how a cause of much of the trouble in both of those places is directly related to the same cause. It starts with a U, and we'll get to that. We're going to talk a little bit about a hearing that took place this week in front of the United States Supreme Court on an issue that's going to be very relevant here in California. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about housing policy in California. So like I told my friend Michael Madrid, we're not talking immigration today unless somebody asks about it, but I'm happy to chat about it. So governor's race, I've written a lot on this. Everyone has written a lot on it. I think the biggest thing that's going on in the governor's race right now is how unexciting the candidates are to the electorate. One of the reasons why there's such a large undecided percentage of voters is that the voters either have decided to pay attention to the governor's race and have decided that there's no one interesting in the race, or the lack of interesting people running has caused a complete lack of interest and voters are just not engaged yet. So when you look at the people that are running, you first have to notice who is not running. And so I think there were three and a half potential candidates that could be in the race that I think would have made things a lot more exciting. Number one, of course, would be Kamala Harris. The polls showed that she would have been walking away with it, the front runner. There would be none of these conversations about would the top two and could two Republicans make it to the top. She would be at least in the 30s, if not in the 40s. And yeah, those numbers could come down, but they wouldn't have to come down. They'd have to come down a lot. So, but she took a pass. I think, first of all, she did what she always does, which is takes forever to make decisions. But at the end of the day, I came to the conclusion that once you've been the vice president of the United States, and in her case, she not only was she the vice president, so I'm going to turn the camera here a little bit. Not only was she actually, I'm going to move the screen behind, so I'm looking at you guys. Not only was she the vice president of the United States, but I could actually argue that with President Otto Penn, she may have had more say than a typical vice president. And let's remember, it doesn't get talked about much, but she had a standing lunch with the diminishing president every single week. And so it's not like she didn't know he was declining. And anyways, I think she simply didn't want to be the governor of California. She wants to be the president of the United States. I think she's got a very hard road to hoe to get there. We've seen a couple of surveys now that have shown that California Democrats prefer Newsom to her pretty substantially. And it would be really, really hard for Harris, I think, to re-energize and engage as a national candidate for president if she can't carry her home state. And it's been kind of interesting because up until this point, she and Newsom have had kind of a you go your way, I'll go my way, I'll support you, you support me, and never the twain shall meet. And now they're in a situation where they both want to occupy the same lane. And I just think Newsom's better positioned to do that. So all of that having been said, the candidate besides Kamala Harris, I think that Alex Padilla, U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, could have come in and really been the leader in the field, and he chose not to run. My friends who know him pretty well say that the reason he chose not to run wasn't that he wasn't up for the fight, but he really is not want to be a governor. That's not of interest to him, which is fair. You shouldn't run for governor if you don't want to be a governor. I think he enjoys being a legislator in the U.S. Senate. I think he enjoys that job, and clearly he's going to stick with it. And then the other candidate that I think probably would not have been as upfront as those two in terms of polling, but would have been a very strong and in first place candidate would have been Rob Bonta, the Attorney General of California. I think that's a very strong ballot title to carry. And when you're talking about how to articulate that you're the most anti-Trump candidate in a field, that guy has sued the Trump administration more than anybody that I could think of. And so, Becerra did a lot of it in the first Trump term back when he was AG, but he took a pass, and I think a lot of that had to do with I wrote about this, did a cartoon about it. Since then, have talked to some people to confirm it. But the unions took a flyer on him. He's got this big $500,000 of legal fees that he's paid to. Let's see if I get this right: Wilson, Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati, which is primarily known as a tech firm in the Bay Area, but they've got a pretty lively white-collar crime criminal defense outfit. And just to remind everybody, when Bonta was asked why he had so many fees, he said he was the witness. I'm sorry, he was somebody who was offering information about someone else's case. We could go into it. It has to do with a family in Oakland and all this, but I went ahead and made a few phone calls to people, not relying on my own intuition. There is no way on God's earth that you rack up $500,000 in legal fees because you happen to have a couple of depositions surrounding a case where you're not the suspect. Um, I think that scared off the unions, and which scared off Bonta, who's never taken a step without union support. And I guess the half is, I don't know what one would call um, our favorite billionaire from the Palisades, Rick Caruso. He took a pass as well. We've already seen how Steyer is performing as a billionaire, and I'm not sure how well Caruso would have done. He certainly is not as strident as and nutty sounding as Tom Steyer, but his Achilles heel would have been a candidacy that everyone would have assumed is really a shadow candidacy for mayor of Los Angeles, and his focus on the Palisades fire, which is understandable. It devastated his own community. Anyways, all those people got out, and we're left with 8 very ho-hum people. And and so I don't know at what point whether or not somebody's going to leap way out in front. I think that we're getting very close to the stage where all of these candidates have been busy raising money. They've raised millions of dollars and they haven't spent it yet. And I think one of the reasons why Rusty Hicks, who's the chairman of the California Democrat Party, has been making a lot of noise. Hey, people need to drop out. People need to get out of the race so that we can consolidate it. We're going to get the 2 Republicans on top. And they're doing this polling and putting out polling. But I think that it's a bit of a folly to ask these candidates who have spent so much time and energy raising money to get out of the race before they get a chance to spend their money. For the most part, right now, all these public opinion surveys that have come out, and now the private opinion survey done by the Democrat Party, are all based on, name idea that comes through earned media primarily. Other than Steyer, of course, has put out his own TV spots. He is spending lots of money again. And also, you've got this IE committee on behalf of Mahan has put out some ads to no effect whatsoever. Mahan continues to be stuck at 3%. And I think, by the way, as a side note, I'm not sure. I mean, Mahan probably makes some sense to more conservative leaning independents and Republicans than he does to base Democrat voters with the messaging that he has. The problem is Republicans are not going to cross over and vote for a Democrat when there are Republicans on the ballot. And so I think his lane is too small. I'm not sure how Matt Mahan carves out a lane that's large enough given the progressive left that the Democrat Party has become, especially in a primary. So anyways, we'll see what happens, but we've got these 8 candidates who got out. So one, they call him prominent candidate that got out was Ian Calderon. I'm not sure what criteria used to call him prominent. I think he was well known in the Capitol and in the Capitol area when he was in the state assembly. And he's known over in Whittier, where his family name is more known for former politicians in prison than anything else. But he got out of the race, but he never had any meaningful support anyway. So the governor's race is really jacked up, and it really begs the question about what's going to happen over the next 6 weeks before ballots arrive that is going to upset this notion that 2 Republicans may end up in the first and second spots. And so what I would say to that is a couple things could happen. The most significant things that could happen, I figured out there were 3 of them. One would be if President Trump were to come in and actually endorse one of the 2 Republicans. I don't think he's likely to do that. But if he did, it would be for Hilton. I'm sure of that. I think Donald Trump knows that the odds of a Republican versus a Democrat in November are very, very long for the Republican. And of course, Chad Bianca will go back to sheriffing in Riverside County. But where will Steve Hilton go? Well, one could assume that he might go back to Fox News, and Donald Trump will care about whether he's got a Fox News host who's friendly in the final 2 years of his second term in the White House. Also, they have a relationship. Trump is rather famous. I don't know if people know that he does this, but he's got the cell phone numbers of all the Fox News hosts. And when he wants to, he just calls them. He'll call them on commercial breaks. He'll call them after their shows. Apparently, it happens quite frequently. And Steve Hilton himself has told me about when this has happened to him. So I don't think he's going to weigh in. Frankly, I think his people will probably say, hey, everyone keeps talking about how there's a chance, however slight, the two Republicans can make the runoff. Why would you weigh in and take away that chance? Because I do think that if Trump were to endorse either of them, Hilton or Bianco, both of them have enough money that they have raised to make sure that Republican voters know that they have a Trump endorsement. And if you look at all the polling lately, a Trump endorsement doesn't help you in most places, but with likely Republican primary voters, that's a group of people that he does help with. So we'll see. So one of the items that could impact the race is a Trump endorsement. Another thing that could potentially impact the race is whether or not the public employee unions employ what I'm going to call the shift strategy, because he did it most recently. I've talked about this, but last year, or now it's 2 years ago, in 2024, Adam Schiff had raised a boatload of money, I think $40 million, something like that. And at some point, he was worried about Katie Porter on his heels. And so he put up ads, which we've talked about before, and I've linked to them before, and you may remember them. He put up ads specifically in places where Republicans could see them, where, hi, I'm liberal Adam Schiff, and I'm running against right-winger Steve Garvey. And he touted Garvey being a Trump supporter, Garvey being, pro-gun, pro-life, all those things. And it was done purposely to drive Republican enthusiasm for Garvey. And it worked. As a matter of fact, it worked so well that Garvey came within 3,000 votes of actually having the most votes and actually passing up Schiff. But the result was, hold on a minute, something happened. We just had a shutdown. Sorry about that. My screen went down. So it worked so well that Garvey almost was the top vote getter, and Katie Porter got left in the dirt. And so, unless it's Steyer, none of the candidates that are running for governor that are running for governor have the kind of money that was raised by Schiff to be able to really afford to do those ads, because they really need to lift themselves with Democrat voters. But the California Teachers Association, SEIU 1000 and its associated unions, the California Labor Federation, there's a bit of overlap. Those entities have a vast sum of resources available. So they become the next most likely group of people that might weigh in and try to boost one of the Republicans over the other to avoid a top two system. If you assume that if you boost one, it takes points from the other. And then last but not least, which is a great transition into my second topic, would be, I think that if the California Republican Party were to endorse one of these two candidates, that could be enough. Like I said, these candidates have enough money to let high propensity Republican voters know they have an endorsement. So the party weighing in could have that tilting effect. And also remember, it's not just if the candidates have enough money. If the California Republican Party weighs in, that would allow the unions, ironically, to advertise that CRP endorsement to Republican voters and effectuate that shifting that I think needs to happen. And so it's ironic that even though Bianco and Hilton have raised a good chunk of money, I really do think that they're going to be at the mercy of bigger spending if that kind of strategy gets employed. So California Republicans are going to gather in a couple weeks in San Diego. It's an interestingly timed convention. The convention is late enough that first and foremost, you couldn't impact who actually filed for office. If the party actually got involved, like in February or in January, you can make an argument that at least the party is trying to endorse some candidates and maybe create a scenario where other candidates don't file. Too late for that. And then it's also too late. I don't know who will read the page that's in the middle of the big fat brochure that's going to get mailed to every California voter. But tucked in there is a sheet where it says, here are the endorsements made by the political parties. It's kind of complicated, but when Prop 14 was created and put on the ballot, they put some things in it to strengthen it against a challenge for its constitutionality. And so they went out of their way to say, hey, we're not depriving the parties of a voice. Their voice is right in the brochure. The party's endorsements will be listed, so party members who are voting have a way to know who their party is supporting. even though they're not guaranteed, each party is no longer guaranteed a candidate on the general election ballot. So I say all of that because this convention is also timed so late that any endorsements made at the convention will also not appear in the brochure to the extent that anybody would read it into the booklet. So really at this point, um, I think that what's going on more than anything, if I could just call the shot the way that I see it, is that this endorsement brouhaha at the convention is really more of a fundraising structure for the California Republican Party. I know about this. I'm a former executive director of the party, and conventions have the potential to make a lot of money. We made some money at the conventions because our primary focus at that time was how do we make the conventions as grassrootsy as possible and drag down the costs. So when we got sponsors and all of that, we took that money and lowered the cost for the experience for the delegates. That is clearly not happening here. The costs for a delegate to participate in these conventions are really, really high. There is no subsidy from the party for the delegate experience. The delegates are being asked to fund party operations, and that's okay. I get it. Different times back when I was at the party, which was 99 to 2001, late 98, 99, 2001 at the front end. They were different times. The party was more robust. Republicans in the state had a much more robust position. Now I think it's tough to be the California Republican Party with no statewide office holders whatsoever, super minorities in the legislature. You get clobbered with Prop 50. That's not fun for fundraising. So you got to raise the money where you can raise it. But if I'm a delegate at this convention, you almost have to step back and say to yourself, okay, if I'm a Republican delegate and I've endorsed and I'm supporting Sheriff Bianco, or I'm a delegate to the convention and I've endorsed and I'm supporting Steve Hilton, um, at what point do you step back and say, well, the best way for my candidate to actually become governor would be to try to see if you can roll snake eyes on the dice and get two Republicans into the general election. Then, frankly, it would matter if you had a party endorsement, if it was a Republican on Republican general election. So it'll be interesting to see if some of these delegates will vote for no endorsement rather than voting for a candidate that maybe they're supporting with an understanding that the best thing for these candidates would be for the party to stay out. Maybe. So that's what I have to say about the California GOP convention. And then I promised everybody that I was going to talk a little bit about what's going on with the Los Angeles Unified School District and their problems, and the Bay Area Rapid Transit District and their problems. And for those of you who haven't read, I wrote about these two entities in the last couple of weeks. BART is totally FUBAR. Their model got jacked up. BART was at a point, and I put some charts in here. The Washington Post did a great editorial, which is what sparked my interest, and I stole some of their charts. I gave them attribution that showed how jacked up things are. Before COVID hit, the Bay Area Rapid Transit District had, probably, I think it was well over 80% of the cost of somebody's trip on BART was paid for by that person's fare. So that there were subsidies, but they were relatively small subsidies, and they were covered by regional taxes and that were coming in to BART. And then COVID hit, and when COVID hit, their ridership obviously completely tanked. And then when COVID came back, their ridership didn't really come back robustly at all. And in fact, it has stayed low because now people have figured out I can work from home, and a lot of people are working from home. A lot of changes took place, but at the same time, this is you can't make this stuff up, and this will be very similar to our LAUSD situation. At the same time that ridership had dropped in BART, along with everyone else, was getting all this free COVID money, and they used it, get this, to give raises and hire new staff people and create new permanent expenditures. So while the ridership in BART went down and the fees, the ticket fares funding BART went down, they drove up their expenses, drove up everything, all of their costs astronomically. Again, I wrote about this. You can see it on my site. If you don't know how to do that, go to sodoesitmatter.com. There's an archive button, and then type in BART. It'll pop right up. And so they have found themselves in a horrendous situation. And so they've done two things. One, they took out a big loan from the state of California that was facilitated by Democrats. I want to say it was a $500 million loan, but it was really big. Maybe I have that off. Really big loan. And then on top of it, they got the state to help them to put on to the ballot, I guess, in a bunch of Bay Area counties, all the Bay Area counties, a sales tax increase that if it passes for the length of it, I don't remember the exact length of it, 13 years, something like that. It would be a multi-billion-dollar tax increase, massive amounts of money that would come in. And then, what's not there is a lot of times they'll say, hey, you know what? We've ran out of money. We need higher taxes. We know most of you are not going to ride BART, but BART's important to the Bay Area. Here are the things we have done to make sure that we won't go upside down again. And they'll have a bunch of reforms and a taxpayer oversight committee. And we're making these reductions, these changes. None of that. There is nothing on here but just a brute force. We want you we want you to vote to raise your own taxes. And I laugh because, of course, this is being pushed by the left, and they're pushing a sales tax, which is about as regressive as they come. And so the people that make the least amount of money are going to end up paying the most of it. My prediction is that it fails. I think that the voters aren't going to go for it. And I think that would be a good thing because it will force some reflection and introspection. And they're going to have to really figure out how to clean up BART, reduce its footprint. And then they can look to, there's 2 or 3 other cities on planet Earth that have really figured out how to do the driverless train technology. And I mean, the reality is right now, there's this alliance between the Enviros led by the crazy bicycle caucus, all the fanatical bike users. Sorry, my screen went dark again. I got to fix it. I think it's because I don't touch my keyboard. And then the unions. And the unions in this case, and this will be a good transition to LA Unified. Like the analogy that I made when I wrote about it is I analogized the unions to like public employee, to like pirates on a ship. And you can imagine if you've got a ship and you're being chased by the pirates and they finally catch you and they're going to sink your ship. So they take your loot, they take your treasure, they take your people, everything that can come off of that boat comes off the boat and then they sink it. And there's an old saying about taking the brass fittings. And that's where they actually, anything of value on the boat would include the hardware itself. And that's really kind of what you've got with these public employee unions. They just take everything of value and they take it and they leave nothing behind, even to the point where you say, if you do this, you're going to sink the ship on which you are residing. It's like the what's that old parable of the scorpion that stings the frog? So what is the deal? I think there's a scorpion and a frog, and they're on one side of a river, and there's a little island in the middle of the river. And so the scorpion says, Mr. Frog, I want to get to the other side of the river. Will you take me? And the frog says, I'm not going to take you because as soon as I put you on my back, you're going to sting me and I'm going to die. And that's going to be that. And apparently the scorpion does a really good job of convincing the frog, no, this won't happen. Why would I do that? If I sting you, we'd both die. We'd go in the river and we'd die. And the frog says, you're right. Why would you do that? And so the frog kneels down, the scorpion gets on it, and the frog jumps to the island in the middle of the river. And right on that island, sure as it can be, the scorpion stings the frog. And as the frog is going through the death throes, he says, why did you sting me? Now you're going to be stuck on this island forever. There's no way for you to get off. And the scorpion just says, I stung you because that's what scorpions do. And I tell that story because these unions have no capability to do anything other than greed, take, more money for my salaries, more salaries for my benefits, and more relaxed work environment. It's just rinse, wash, repeat over and over again, which takes us to the LA Unified School District, where the unions there, school districts are in a world of hurt statewide, mainly driven by the fact that school enrollment is down. And in California, funding for schools comes through, as they call it, butts in chairs. And if somebody's not in a chair, then the school district doesn't get money for that. By the way, if I'm the CTA, my big agenda this year is going to be to try to change that. They've got enough political muscle. I think they want to say, hey, fund us by enrollment numbers, not by who shows up at school. I think they did that for a little while during COVID on an emergency order from their governor bitch friend. But anyways, the LA Unified School Districts are drowning in red ink. They are burning through their reserves. They've only got a couple of years left, maybe 3 years at most, before all their reserves are gone. They're getting hit by all these massive lawsuits uh, from victims of sexual abuse, from teachers and other employees of the school district. They're paying out hundreds of millions of dollars on that. As a matter of fact, they just took out a bond measure to finance settlements, and they still have hundreds of cases to go. Anyway, so the school district's in bad shape. And so the unions, the LA Teachers Union, along with SEIU Local 99, I think, which is the union that supports all of the non-teachers in LA public schools. So think about your custodians, your janitors, your all of the people that, facilities people, everyone that keeps a school going. They strike with the teachers, and then that effectively shuts down the school. And they have threatened that if they have not gotten big raises, and they want what do they want? They want big double digit raises. They want to change the pay structure so that a new teacher starts making 80 grand a year, and experienced teachers can make well into the mid 100s. By the way, this is for a job that lasts 9 months of the year. They get the summers off, right? Don't forget that. They also want guarantees against AI taking jobs. They get this whole laundry list of things they want. And they're talking to a school district that may as well be called, Clusterfuckistan, because their superintendent is out because the FBI raided his home as they're investigating a criminal matter having to do with a company that, among other things, now has a contract with LA Unified School District. And the money is short. And so the cartoon that I did when I wrote about this was I had somebody from SEIU and somebody from UTLA holding their picket signs. And behind them on one side is a group of students. And they're like, yeah, those are the students that are out of work because we're picketing. And then behind them is a group of teachers. And they're like, yeah, those are the teachers that are going to lose their jobs. Because that's the way it works. In order to give some teachers raises, when you have no money, you have to increase your layoffs. And that gets into the death spiral of the public employee unions. And it's worth talking about this because what happens is if the economy is good, and the economy is good means that more money is flowing into federal, state, and local governments who are largely funded by income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes. When times are good, then the unions are like, hey, there's money, give us raises. We deserve more money. Everyone's doing well, give us more raises. And they get more raises. But this is what happens when the economy takes a turn. Right now, things are not that great. Every day we're reading about more companies laying people off. I know a lot of people who work for companies that have not gotten raises or have been told they have to have their hours cut back. But then what happens is the unions come forward and say that we can't keep up with inflation. The cost of living is too high. And so we need you to give us raises when local governments don't have raises. But what happens is then they get raises, and then the cities underfund essential services, or the school districts underfund essential services. And then they go out saying, we need to pass a tax increase to pay for these services. What's really going on is, well, we gave away too much money to the unions, and now we need more money. And then, of course, the last piece about all of this is that the unions, through their political action committees and other efforts, typically elect the very people that decide whether they get these raises. And so they own both sides of the table. I don't have the quote in front of me. There's a great quote from President Roosevelt, a Democrat who, as you know, was in office a long time, where he was a big supporter of private unions, but he was a big, big skeptic of public employee unions. And he actually brought up this fact that public employees unionizing mean that kind of elected officials are no longer the final arbiters about what is happening, or if they are, they're bought and paid for. So both the LA Unified School District and the Bay Area Rapid Transit District are completely FUBAR, and we'll just see what happens. I do want to, I've got two quick other items I'm going to hit, and then I'll open it for questions. One of which is earlier this week, I sent out an emergency update, a breaking news. There was a hearing held before the U.S. Supreme Court. The Republican National Committee have filed a lawsuit challenging whether or not, under current law, under the Constitution and under the law, it was appropriate in federal elections to be counting ballots after election day or not. And the details get into parsing the actual words, which now matter because a majority of the United States Supreme Court falls under the kind of the textualist, I'll say slash originalist, although those are definitely not the same thing. But I will say that under this court, the text of what it says in a law really matters. They really care about what you put in writing. Under liberal courts, there's a lot more interpretation that goes on. Frankly, a lot of legislating through the bench takes place. But this Supreme Court majority is sounded based on the questions that came, especially from some of those justices that tend to be swingy, made it sound like they think that the law, the way that it's written, would prevent vote counting in federal races after election day. So if that happens, if they come out with a ruling, it would certainly be in more than enough time that there'd be an expectation that this would apply to the November general election this year. And there are 14 states, including 15 states, including California, that currently have laws on the books that allow for ballots to be received after election day and still be counted as long as they're postmarked by election day. By the way, it's a separate issue that the United States Postal Service is getting ready to stop putting dates on their postmarks. That's a separate issue about how do you prove when somebody puts their ballot in the mail if there's no longer a date on your postmark. But before we even get to that, is it may not matter because I think it's very likely that in federal races, ballots are going to have to be received by election day. And as a practical matter, certainly here in California, federal elections, president, U.S. Senate, Congress, are on the same ballot as all the local races. And it'd be very, very expensive to bifurcate that or split it up. If you did, then those rules, sorry, my screen went dark again, then those rules would not apply. But as long as they're connected, they would apply. And I don't know what Democrats will do. They have a lot of power in lawmaking. They can gather in an emergency session and with 2/3 votes in both chambers, pass urgency legislation, but I'm not sure what that would be. At the end of the day, they could open up the rolls sooner. They could open up voting sooner. And they certainly could spend a lot of taxpayer money educating people to return their ballots sooner. So that's coming. I think it's pretty likely. We'll see where it goes. And then the last item that I was going to hit on this Substack Live was on housing policy. For those of you who missed my column yesterday, this goes to the issue of what happens, what are the consequences of policymaking in a state capital where one party controls everything. One party controls the legislative process with supermajorities. One party controls the governorship. And you don't even really have a court system to rely on because over the years, we've now gotten to a point where all the judges in the court system are predominantly of that same political party. And it matters in policymaking. Pew Research came out with a study where they studied nationally, but also includes, obviously, the nation includes California. And what they found out is there's a pretty big partisan divide about ideal housing choices. Democrats, by and large, a significant majority of them want more urban, dense, stacked housing. A lot of them live in that environment now. They're very comfortable with it. They're city dwellers, and they really want availability for more of that housing, for more apartments, more condos in that area. Republicans, by a significantly larger majority, overwhelming majority, would prefer to live in suburbs, would prefer to live out in the exurbs, and they would like, more single family homes, more house with a yard and a lawn, a garage, all that. And so take that information and look at what's happened with housing policy in the state capital. You had a lot of changes in housing policy, but they've all been directed towards increasing the housing supply that Democrats want. More density, more urban, more infill. And that's all stuff that's very popular with Democrats. And so it makes sense that that's what's happening in Sacramento, because the legislators and the governor that are pushing this are all getting feedback loops from Democrats. And so what's not happening, the examples of that are many. They've got CEQA exemptions for only high density urban development and infill, or even density development in suburbs, which people in the suburbs don't want. You've got changes in costs. It's cheaper. And then also, they've really directed kind of affordable housing is their lingo for it, but taxpayer subsidized housing in these urban settings. So if you're a property owner, you got a piece of property, um, they've set up a permission structure to increase the value of your property by creating their preferred form of development. But they've continued to leave up all of the barriers so that it doesn't make economic sense for you to turn your property into unpreferred types of housing like single family homes. And so at the end of the day, you're ending up with just a rush towards density that represents the interests of one political party and doesn't represent the interests of voters in the other. Independent voters are split on this. But if you take the national total, there's like a 10-point advantage nationally of people that would prefer single family homes and lower density living. And none of that is reflected in California policy whatsoever. And so it's pretty ridiculous, the housing policy. With that, I've now managed to burn up 40 plus minutes on my long filibuster talking about the governor's race, talking about the California Republican Party convention, LA Unified School District, BART, early balloting, and housing policy. I am willing to take some topics if people want to throw them our way. We're getting close to bandwidth here. But if people have something they want me to riff about or talk about or have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. And in the meantime, if you got onto this conversation late, and of course, the vast majority of people that will watch this all together are going to be the ones who get this as a kind of a finished production with a bow on it. So um, we're sitting here at T minus 43 minutes. And without anything else in the queue, I'm going to let everybody go. And I appreciate everybody participating. Joy Henley, you just hopped on as I'm leaving. So you're going to have to catch up on everything. I'm going to email everybody the video on this. 45 minutes is about a good sweet spot for ending. I will end on my favorite topic, which will make some people happy, make some people depressed. But tonight, your world champion Los Angeles Dodgers are going to have their opening game at Chavez Ravine. I will be there. And for those of you that go, Chavez Ravine, are they going to change the name? The Chavez family dates back to the 1800s, and they originally owned the land where Dodger Stadium is today, and they have no relation whatsoever to Cesar Chavez. And in fact, maybe the descendants of that Chavez family are rolling their eyes at what has happened to the Chavez family name. So with that last bit of information, I will see some of you at Dodger Stadium, and this video will be live either this afternoon or tomorrow morning, or will not be live, will be taped and shared later this afternoon. Thanks, everybody. If you enjoyed it, give me a little heart, give me a like, let me know you're all out there. It's a little button that you push right in front of you. And then we're going to sign off. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. That's what we got. If I could figure out where the button is to end the live chat. There it is in the corner. See ya.